Welcome to Audio Short Story, where family names are weapons, blood tests are verdicts, and the truth always arrives with a receipt. Before we begin, let me ask you something. If you woke up tomorrow and found out your entire life was a clerical error, would you walk away quietly, or would you burn the world down just to see who flinches first? If the people who raised you suddenly look at you like an invoice they forgot to pay, do you still call them family? If the boy standing where you used to stand has your face, your age, your silhouette, then who exactly have you been all these years? And if the mansion door closes behind you without a single sincere apology, was that love? Or was it a long-term investment that didn't pan out? Tell me, how many meals does it take to become someone's son? How many birthdays? How many "I'm proud of you" do you have to hear before you're allowed to believe them? And if one lab result can erase 19 years, what does that say about the people who signed the checks and called it parenting? I kept asking myself those questions while I rolled my suitcase down the marble hallway of the Hawthorne estate, trying not to let the wheels rattle too loudly, like I might wake the ghosts of the life I was leaving behind. I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors. I didn't shout, "This isn't fair," because fairness is a luxury you only believe in when you've never been replaced. And besides, what would I even be yelling at? At Mr. Hawthorne, who looked embarrassed the way powerful men do when something inconvenient becomes public. At the returning real son, who was crying like he'd been robbed when the only thing he'd lost was time. At the 16-year-old little brother, who stared at me as if he couldn't decide whether to hate me or miss me. Or at myself for believing that a life built on borrowed blood could last forever. The truth is, I'd prepared for the end long before it arrived. I'd prepared for the moment someone would finally say out loud what I'd suspected since I was small. That my reflection didn't match the family photo, that my laugh didn't sound like theirs, that my temper didn't carry their signature. I'd even told Mr. Hawthorne once, bluntly, like a kid who still thought honesty was safe. He'd laughed it off and called me dramatic. He'd said envy wasn't a good look. He'd said, "You're my son." He hadn't said, "You're my blood." And now here we were, standing in the quiet aftermath of a truth that suddenly made everything make sense and nothing feel real. The real son, Elliot, kept his head down, shoulders shaking, a perfect portrait of fragile innocence. Mr. Hawthorne hovered beside him, torn between relief and guilt, like a man trying to decide which suit to wear to his own confession. And me? I already knew the script. The substitute exits. The rightful heir stays. The audience applauds the restoration of order. Except life isn't a play, and order always has a hidden cost. The cost, in this case, was me. I told myself I'd be fine. I told myself I'd go back to where I came from, some rural nowhere called Ridge County, where the roads were narrow and the people didn't care who your father was. I pictured a sickly couple, a broken porch swing, and maybe a handful of goats behind a leaning fence. I pictured hardship. Sure, but a simple kind of hardship. Work, sleep, repeat. Nothing sharp. Nothing political. Nothing that smiled while it cut. That's what I expected. What I didn't expect was the way the world seemed to tilt the moment I stepped outside the Hawthorne gates, like something huge had been waiting for me to cross an invisible line. What I didn't expect was the sense that someone, somewhere, already knew I was coming. What I didn't expect was how many secrets could fit inside a homecoming. Mr. Hawthorne cleared his throat, the sound of a man practicing empathy. "Liam, you can stay here a few days. If you need anything, ask Ms. Delaney." He said it to Elliot first, his voice soft enough to be a blanket. Then he turned to me like he was facing a tricky contract. I nodded before he could. "Offer me pity. I'll pack and go." His eyebrows pinched. "That's not what I meant." He exhaled, the kind of sigh that pretends to be fatherly but mostly sounds like relief. "I looked into your birth family, the Carters. The situation isn't ideal. 3 brothers, and the reports weren't good. If you go back, you'll be disadvantaged." Disadvantaged, like I was a stock with bad projections. I smiled anyway. I'd mastered that smile young, The one that makes rich people feel less guilty for stepping on you. I'll be fine, sir. I'm going home. Are you sure? Yes. My name had been Liam Hawthorne for 19 years. That morning, it became Liam Carter on a piece of paper that smelled like ink and erasure. And as I dragged my suitcase down the driveway, I felt the last thread of my old identity snap. Not violently, not dramatically, just quietly, the way a string breaks when it's been fraying for a long time. I didn't look back. Not because it didn't hurt, because looking back is how you give them permission to call you sentimental. The bus stop was 3 blocks away, and for the first time in my life I stood under a sun-faded schedule board, squinting at routes like a person who didn't have a driver. I'd never ridden public transit. Not once. It felt absurdly intimate. Standing shoulder to shoulder with strangers who didn't know my last name meant anything. The bus wheezed up, line 168, North Ridge, last stop. I hauled my suitcase up the steps. The driver, a middle-aged guy with tired eyes, nodded at the fare box. Card or cash? I fumbled my wallet, like it was a foreign object. The Hawthorne estate had trained me in a lot of things: dinner etiquette, conversation pacing, how to look interested in investments. It had not trained me to feed a machine. I glanced at the slot, then up at the driver, and asked the dumbest question I've ever asked in my life. Can I tap a bank card? The entire bus went quiet. Not metaphorically, actually. Quiet. Like I'd asked if gravity was optional. A dozen eyes turned toward me, curious and annoyed and entertained all at once. The driver blinked like he was trying to decide whether I was joking. Heat crawled up my neck. Right, of course. I dug out a crisp bill. Too crisp, too red, too expensive looking for that moment, and reached for the slot. Before it could touch plastic, a hand shot past me and dropped in 2 coins. Clink, clink. The sound was small, but it saved me. I looked up. White t-shirt, lean build, clean jawline, the kind of face people pay surgeons to chase. He glanced at me like he was taking inventory, then smiled just barely. I got it. Keep your money. For a second I just stared. Not because of the coins, because something about him felt wrong. Familiar in a way that made my stomach tighten. He walked toward the back, one hand in his pocket like he owned the aisle. I tugged my suitcase after him, lowered my voice like gratitude was a secret. Thanks. I'll pay you back. He didn't even turn around. Don't. And don't ask for my number. He took a window seat, sunlight slicing across his profile, turning him into the kind of pretty that makes you angry on principle. I sat a row away, pretending I wasn't rattled. The bus rolled out of the city, and the world outside the glass transformed from clean streets and polished hedges into uneven roads and thick trees. South of Briarcrest, the city everyone called the capital like it was a kingdom, were golf clubs and lakefront mansions. East was luxury tourism. West was private, school campuses and gated communities. But north was where the city stopped pretending it cared. The asphalt cracked. The cell signal faded. The ride got rough enough that my suitcase thumped against my shin with every pothole. I watched the trees close in, taller and denser, as if we were driving into a secret the map didn't want to show. I told myself it was fine. I told myself peace could look like emptiness. Then the bus hissed to a stop at the last station, and the driver called out, "End of the line." Most people got off. I did too. The white shirt guy stood behind me on the steps, his voice close to my ear. "Last stop. You getting off or what?" I stepped down into dirt and wind. He followed, and the moment my shoes hit the ground, he spoke again, sharper this time. "You've been tailing me?" I let out a short laugh, half disbelief, half nerves. "No. I live here." He scanned the empty lot, the rough road, the wild brush beyond it. His mouth twitched like he didn't buy it. "Sure. A kid dressed like you comes out here to play country life?" "I'm not playing." I kept my tone steady. "I'm moving here." His eyes narrowed. And then, like the scene had been timed, 2 figures appeared up the road, walking toward us with the kind of confidence that didn't match the landscape. One wore a black blazer, glasses catching the light. The other wore a white, button-down with sleeves rolled just so, expression cool and unreadable. They looked like they'd stepped out of a downtown skyline and into a place that didn't know what to do with them. The man in the blazer smiled, polite and controlled, the smile of someone who wins in court for a living. The other carried himself like someone who's seen blood and doesn't flinch anymore. The blazer guy called out my name like he'd been saying it all his life. Liam. My throat tightened. How did he say it so naturally? I managed to answer, voice respectful on instinct. Sir. He reached us, eyes warm behind the lenses. You made it. I'm Grant Carter. Then he gestured to the man in the white shirt. And this is Julian. I didn't need a DNA test to know what they were. The resemblance sat in their bone structure like a stamp, subtle, undeniable. These were my brothers. The ones I'd been warned about. The ones Mr. Hawthorne said weren't ideal. Grant looked like he belonged behind a desk lined with law books. Julian looked like he belonged in a hospital corridor at 3 a.m. I swallowed, then spoke the words that felt both strange and inevitable. Nice to meet you, Grant. Julian. My voice echoed in my own head. For a split second I thought I heard it twice, like a second mouth repeating me. I turned. The white shirt guy, the one who'd paid my fare, was standing there with his arms crossed, staring at me like I'd stolen his air. Up close, the wrongness snapped into focus. His face wasn't just familiar. It was mine. Same cheekbones. Same mouth. Same eyes if you ignored the contempt inside his. He spoke and the sound landed like a slap. Oh, it's you. Grant's smile didn't change, but his gaze flicked to him, warning, quiet. Julian didn't speak at all, but the temperature around his eyes dropped. The guy, my reflection, snorted. Unlucky. Then he turned and started walking away like the ground belonged to him. Grant's voice followed him, calm but edged. Ethan. So that was his name. Ethan Carter. My brother. My twin. My skin prickled. Grant stepped in front of me slightly, like his body knew what my mind hadn't finished processing yet. Leaving your brother to drag his suitcase alone. Do you think that's appropriate? Julian's gaze cut toward Ethan, cold as a scalpel. Ethan stopped, jaw flexing, then spun back like he'd been ordered, not asked. He marched up to me, grabbed the handle of my suitcase, and barked through his teeth. Give it. His tone was rough, but his hands looked like they knew exactly how much weight they were dealing with. I blinked at him, then at Grant. Grant gave me a small nod, the kind that said, welcome. Don't panic. Julian's expression softened by a fraction. I offered the politest smile I had left. Thank you. Ethan muttered like gratitude offended him. I'm not doing this for you. He tried to hoist the suitcase onto his shoulder with a show of strength. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again, choosing kindness over comedy. It's heavy. You can roll it. He scoffed. I can handle. The suitcase swung wrong and slammed down with a hard, humiliating thud that made a flock of birds startle out of the brush. Ethan's face twisted with pain and fury. I pressed my lips together so I wouldn't smile. I told you. He glared like he might bite me. What do you have in here, bricks? Just normal stuff. I nodded toward the wheels. It literally rolls. Behind us, Grant let out a quiet laugh, then stepped closer and rested a hand briefly on the back of my head, gentle, grounding, unfamiliar in the best way. Don't mind him. Mom and Dad are waiting. We walked. The road led through scrub and hills, and then the house came into view. 3 stories, self-built, big enough to hold a family and loud enough to announce that whoever lived here didn't care what city people thought. The tile work was bold, almost chaotic. In the yard behind it, a goat pen sat beside stacked feed bags. I stared, my brain still clinging to the image of a collapsing farmhouse. This wasn't that. And beyond the house, beyond the yard, rose a line of hills so tall they looked like sleeping giants. White dots moved across the slopes. Not snow. Animals. Lots of them. I slowed without meaning to. Julian noticed and said quietly, like he was reading my thoughts. Don't ask yet. Don't ask what? He didn't answer. Grant did, smiling like the secret was a gift he hadn't decided to unwrap. Later, the front door burst open. Before we reached the steps, a woman hurried out, beautiful in a way that didn't look manufactured, hair pulled back, eyes already wet. Behind her came a man with a round face and trembling mouth, the kind of man who looks like he laughs easily and cries even easier. The moment he saw me, he didn't hesitate. He ran and grabbed me, crushing me to his chest like he could fuse 19 years back into place with force alone. My son. His voice broke. His shoulders shook. The embrace smelled like soap and sun and something unpolished. Real. I stood stiff for half a second, then, without permission, my throat tightened. Not because I missed the Hawthorns, because no one had ever held me like I wasn't negotiable. The man pulled back, staring at me like he was checking every inch for damage. You've suffered. All these years, you've suffered. Ethan made a sound under his breath, disgust dressed as indifference. Yeah, right. He lived like royalty. The man froze, eyes darting between us. The woman's fingers tightened on her apron. Grant's smile thinned. Julian's gaze sharpened. I lifted my chin, meeting my father's eyes directly. I didn't suffer. I chose truth over performance. I wasn't abused. I was raised. My father's eyes filled harder, like honesty hurt him more than lies would have. But you weren't with us. Ethan rolled his eyes, like grief was dramatic. I turned to him for the first time without politeness cushioning my voice. Whatever you think you know, you don't. Ethan's jaw worked. Grant cut in smoothly before the spark could catch. Everyone eat. We talk after. That night, at the dinner table, the air was thick with everything unsaid. Grant asked me about school, about my transfer, about whether I wanted to stay in Briarcrest University like the Hawthorns had planned. Julian watched me the way doctors watch patients, quietly, precisely, catching every flinch. Ethan stared at his plate like it personally offended him that I existed. I tried to find the right way to explain the problem without saying the word money, like it was shame. Because I'd been rich for 19 years, and now I didn't know what I was allowed to want. I finally said it the only way I could. I might need to change my enrollment. Grant adjusted his glasses. Why? You can stay at Briarcrest. Julian tilted his head slightly. Or you could switch programs if you're worried about fit. I took a breath. It's not about fit. Ethan snorted like he already knew the punchline. I looked at Grant and Julian and forced the words out, blunt and small. I'm starting over, like you did, like a scholarship kid from nowhere. And Briarcrest is expensive. Silence. Grant's expression didn't crack, but something softened under it. Julian's gaze warmed by a degree. Ethan opened his mouth, ready to weaponize the moment, and Grant beat him to it with a calm statement that landed like a door locking. Ethan goes there. I turned slowly. Ethan goes to Briarcrest? Ethan's eyes flicked up, sharp. Yeah. So what? So what was? Why did Mr. Hawthorne call this family not ideal if they could send a son to Briarcrest? Why did a house with goats and loud tiles feel like it was hiding something richer than marble? Why did the hills behind the yard look like the backbone of a fortune no one in the city talked about? And why did Ethan look at me like my return wasn't a reunion, but a threat? Grant leaned forward slightly, voice gentle, almost amused. Finish dinner. Tomorrow we'll talk. I nodded like I could sleep, like my mind wasn't screaming questions, like I didn't feel, deep in my bones, that being sent back wasn't the end of my story. It was the opening scene of a much bigger one. Because if this was really just an accidental switch, why did it feel like someone had been managing the fallout for years? If Ethan was my twin, why had he been waiting at that bus line like he knew the exact moment I'd arrive? And if the Carters were truly poor, why did the hills behind our house look less like scenery and more like property?